Good evening, friends. Let us be still for a moment, close the eyes of the mind, release every urge to get, to fix, to prove. In this quiet, we are not trying to bring God into our lives, we are consenting to the presence that is already living us. What if the Christ is not a guest to be invited, but the very life that breathes you now? What would change, today, if you stopped carrying your world and allowed the Christ within to carry you? Tonight we consider this: what happens when you truly understand why Christ lives in you? When this shifts from belief to realization, fear loses its authority. Prayer becomes listening rather than pleading, supply ceases to be a number and becomes an activity of grace. You no longer work to make demonstrations, you abide, and fruit appears of itself. If this meeting of hearts serves you, like the video, comment "One as your sign of oneness, and subscribe so we can sit in this silence together each week. In the next minutes, I'll invite you into one simple inner turning that makes the invisible presence unmistakably real. Are you willing to be still long enough to discover what happens when you do? In that stillness, you may begin to notice that the Christ within is not a traveler who comes and goes, not a power that can be summoned, managed, or applied. It is the very life that is living you now. As long as we imagine God as an influence that occasionally visits, we stand outside our own inheritance, begging at our own door. But when we yield the personal sense that believes it must get hold and control, we find ourselves carried by an interior current, one effortless activity that requires no strain. We do not take hold of the Christ takes hold of us. We do not move spirit moves as us. Consider how often the mind reaches outward for help, for a sign, for power to fix a condition. Every reach outward is a confession that the center has been forgotten. The spiritual life is not an attempt to decorate the human scene with divine assistance. It is awakening to the fact that the divine is the substance, law, intelligence, and animating presence of this very being. To recognize Christ as your own life is to stop trying to add God to circumstance and to begin witnessing how life interprets and sustains itself everywhere you are. When fear arises, the personal mind runs to methods, but realization rests. It does not try to drive out darkness, it stands as light. The Christ within does not fight error, it reveals the unreality of an opposite power. When you are centered in that awareness, prayer ceases to be an attempt to make something happen. Prayer becomes a consent, a listening, a quiet affirmation of what already is, until even affirmation grows silent and only presence remains. In that surrender, decisions become simple, not because you calculate better, but because life is knowing itself as you and expressing its own harmony without your interference. To live this way is not passivity, it is the highest activity. A divine activity that flows without anxiety. The branch bears fruit not by effort but by abiding. So you, abiding in the awareness of the Christ as your very being, find that right ideas appear, necessary contacts arrive, provision unfolds, and even obstacles disclose their hidden instruction. You will notice a new economy of energy, less argument with appearances, more transparency to grace. The heart grows gentle, the mind quiet, the body receptive to the rhythm that has always been moving. Anxiety loosens because there is no longer a separate self charged with saving its world. This recognition often begins in flashes of breath in which you feel carried, a moment when a need is met before you could ask, a conversation that finds words you did not plan. Each flash is not the Christ arriving, it is your awareness clearing enough to notice the life that never departed. Do not worship the flash, turn toward the underlying presence and remain there. Let the habit of reaching out be replaced by the practice of sinking in, as if lowering a bucket into a deep well and drinking until thirst can no longer convince you that the river is elsewhere. And as that habit deepens, you discover that what you once sought as power is presence being itself as you, effortless, unopposed. Sufficient, and so prayer is no longer a project of the mind, but an openness of the heart, a quiet turning that says only yes. Instead of pushing words toward heaven, you let attention sink beneath the noise, cupping the inner ear to a still, deep well. You are not trying to move a distant deity, you are yielding to the presence already humming at your center. Pleading assumes absence, effort assumes separation, but listening arises from union, from the fact that life is here, speaking before you can shape a request. In this posture, prayer becomes receptivity to what is, not a campaign to manufacture outcomes. The practice is simple: be still, relax the will, feel the breath, offer the smallest inward consent. Here I am, then wait. Answers do not always arrive as sentences. More often they appear as an atmosphere, a soft lessening of fear, a rightness you can trust without argument. Sometimes the guidance is a gentle leaning, sometimes a sudden clarity, sometimes a peace that makes the next step obvious. Even apparent silence instructs, because in quiet the frantic demand dissolves, and what remains is a steadying presence moving you from within. This listening is not passive, it is alert, unclenched, hospitable. It does not try to coerce the moment, it welcomes it and attends to the current beneath appearances. When you notice yourself begging, stop, breathe, and return to receptivity, setting aside the insistence on a particular result long enough for wisdom to surface. You are learning to value alignment over instant relief, to trust that harmony precedes form and informs it. Many problems unwind without wrestling when you meet them from this center, as though a knot loosens because you have stopped pulling its ends in panic. If words arise, let them be tender and few, not incantations to compel change, but pointers that return you to silence. Use them like a doorbell, not a battering ram. One gentle ring, then step back and listen. If nothing seems to come, let your prayer be availability. Hear, do as you will, and return to your tasks in quiet confidence. Such confidence is not bravado, it is the fruit of tasting that the presence knows its own way in you. Bring this listening into ordinary moments: before an email, after a hard word, in a line, upon waking and before sleep. These brief pauses train the mind to stop grasping and to notice the inward flow always present. You recognize true guidance by its effects: spaciousness rather than strain, kindness rather than judgment, steadiness rather than rush. Even correction, when it comes, carries mercy and releases energy. And if the mind rushes to fill the silence with plans, notice the rush and let it pass like wind across a lake. The point is not to extract information, but to abide in communion, to be so inwardly attuned that action springs from peace rather than pressure. This is prayer as listening, availability, and trust alone. Because you are no longer praying to get, you discover you are being given. Insight, patience, provision, timing. When fear dictates, you return to listening, to the inner sanctuary where you are known and held. Over time, this way of prayer gathers your scattered attention into one place, and from that wholeness action becomes clear and unforced, and from that wholeness action becomes clear and unforced. From this same center, supply ceases to be arithmetic and reveals itself as grace. When you are busy counting, you are confessing that numbers are your God. When you are consenting, you are yielding to the source that forever outmeasures figures. Counting tightens, consenting opens. Counting multiplies fear, consenting uncovers flow. Supply is not a storehouse you must fill. It is an activity of the presence, appearing as ideas, timing, relationships, opportunities, daily bread. The forms vary. The giver is one. Seek the giver, and forms arrange themselves. This does not mean neglect of practical duties. It means that duty is performed from sufficiency rather than panic. You may still write proposals, send invoices, interview, budget. But you do them as one already supplied, not as a beggar angling for crumbs. The inner stance shifts from "how will I get?" to "how shall grace express?" When you move in that question, your attention turns from channels to source, and channels multiply of their own accord. A single employer, client, product, or donor is not your supply, each is only a faucet. The well is within. Lose a faucet and another appears when the well is honored. What does consenting look like in the hour of need? First, Stop taking thought long enough to feel the presence that is the substance of every form. Breathe. Relax the will. Let the fear-filled arithmetic run and pass like a storm. Then listen. Often the first gift is peace, a loosening that tells you you are not abandoned. Out of that quiet, a simple step will surface: a call to make, an apology to offer, a service to render, an expense to release, a skill to learn, an idea to test. Follow the next light you have. Grace rarely hands you the map. It gives you the next right step and enough light to take it. Notice how gratitude ripens in this practice. Gratitude here is not payment to a distant power. It is recognition that the infinite is active as your very life. You stop praising amounts and start beholding the presence in whatever amount appears. Small forms meet great needs when they come as grace. When large forms become light to carry. Paradoxically, as you stop worshipping totals, sufficiency increases. You become less impressed by peaks and less frightened by valleys, because you are learning the rhythm of manai, enough for today, renewed tomorrow. There is a discipline in this. When the mind lunges to forecast ruin, smile gently and return to the center. When you reach to control every outcome, notice the reach and release it. Ask quietly, what would grace do now? Sometimes grace says act boldly, sometimes wait, sometimes simplify, sometimes give. Giving in this way is not loss, it is trust in the well. You are not throwing away, you are acknowledging the source that cannot be exhausted. And as you do, circulation replaces hoarding, creativity replaces panic, and right form finds you at the right hour. Consent becomes the quiet law of your affairs. You let what is no longer alive fall away, and you welcome what serves this season. You discover that needs are not punishments, but portals through which grace proves itself as the only wealth. And from here, you begin to see that what we call problems are not punishments but portals, and you learn to impersonalize error, to deny it a name, a face, a dwelling. There are not two powers doing battle. There is one presence, and what appears as opposition is only suggestion without substance, a shadow with no sun of its own. The moment you make error personal, my disease, your fault, their greed, you grant it a lease in consciousness. The moment you withdraw personhood, it thins like mist before morning. Practice it in small things. When a bill arrives, when a report alarms, when a body speaks with pain, first be still, remove the pronouns. Not my lack, not our crisis, not his cruelty, only a universal suggestion of separation, the old hypnotic claim that there is a life apart from God. Let that be seen for what it is, and then rest. Do not raise a metaphysical army to drive it out. Light never fights darkness, it shows itself, and darkness is nowhere. This is not denial, it is discernment. You are not pretending that the human picture is pleasant. You are refusing to worship the picture as power. Call the ambulance if needed, pay the bill that is due, apologize where you have erred, set a boundary where wisdom requires it, and do it without granting evil reality. Action taken from non-resistance carries a different fragrance, clarity without heat, firmness without injury. Because you have not made a person your adversary, compassion can flow even as you say no. In relationships, this changes everything. The harsh word, the betrayal, the negligent co-worker cease to be monsters to slay and become calls to see rightly. You look past the mask to the same life that animates you, and you discover the capacity to forgive because there is, in truth, nothing to forgive, only mesmerism lifting. Forgiveness then is recognition, not effort, and miracles become ordinary, conversations soften, motives shift, and sometimes the other simply passes out of your orbit because the lesson is complete. In the body, impersonalization loosens fear. A symptom arises, and the old reflex says, "This is me." Instead, you notice a claim is presenting. You turn within, not to chant it away, but to abide until the felt sense of presence stands where dread stood. From that awareness, the next step is given rest, treatment, a change of habit, a simple yes to help. Because you are not battling a second power, healing often becomes a quiet correction rather than a dramatic war. Extend this to the world stage. Headlines shout of contagion, conflict, collapse. Learn to read them as pictures of universal fear, not proof of an opposite to God. Hold nations, leaders, systems in the light of one presence, and then take whatever civic action is yours to take, free of hatred. Non-resistance is not passivity. It is the refusal to perpetuate the illusion of two powers while doing the good that is given you to do. To write letters, to serve neighbors, to vote conscience. To offer skill without malice, to let the quiet recognition of one power seep through the cracks of policy and culture until what looked immovable begins, inexplicably. To yield not by force but by the gravitation of peace within hearts everywhere from this ground. The gaze turns from the shifting mask of person to the unchanging eye, and the personal sense begins to loosen its grip. The me made of roles, memories, successes, and injuries is a costume, useful on the stage but not the actor. Identity is not the history you carry, it is the presence that carries you. The ancient name is simple and inexhaustible, I am. Before the story begins and after it ends, I am remains. To realize this is not inflation of ego, it is the gentle evaporation of it. The dawning awareness that the life you call yours is the life that is God expressing itself as your very here, and now notice how language reveals allegiance. My life, my mind, my supply, my ministry, each phrase tightens around a private owner. Let language soften the life living as me, the mind thinking in me, the love loving through me, the grace supplying wherever I stand. Then Jesus' word ceases to be a doctrine and becomes a felt fact of myself. I do nothing, but the indwelling presence does the works. When the urge to defend, justify, or advertise the person relaxes, transparency appears. Through that transparency, the light does its own seeing, and what you once called achievement or failure is recognized as weather, passing expressions, not identity. This shift is not self-negation but self-clarity. The personal sense is like steam on a mirror. It fogs the view, it is not the face. Wipe the glass with stillness, and the eye that is aware stands obvious, wordless, steady. That eye is not older tomorrow, not wounded yesterday, not threatened by opinion. It is the holy common denominator in every one you meet. To meet others from I am is to end rivalry at the root, because the same eye is looking through both sets of eyes in relationships. Dropping personal sense dissolves grievance and pride. You no longer need apology to validate worth, nor praise to inflate it. Correction can be received without defensiveness because no one is being diminished. Only the mask is being adjusted. Service becomes natural because there is no private doer demanding reward. There is only the one acting in countless forms. Influence grows quiet and clean, not the charisma of a strong personality, but the authority of presence recognized. Extend this to body and mind. The body is no longer an anxious project of a private self. It is a temple tended by the eye that knows how to order its own house. Care becomes intelligent and kind rather than frantic. Mind is no longer a cramped workshop grinding out strategies. It becomes an avenue of the one mind. You do not try to think your way to God, you let God be the mind that thinks in you. Ideas arrive with the stamp of peace, they fit, they bless. They do not jostle for attention. How to practice. Ask quietly many times a day, who is the I here? Not the name on your email, not the role at your desk, not the age on your license. Feel back into the bare sense of amness prior to descriptions. Rest there a breath longer than habit. If words are useful, let them be few and transparent. I am, and that is enough. Let every affirmation end in silence, where I am is known without syllables. From this recognition, humility and holy boldness walk as one. Humility because there is no personal author, boldness because the author is God. Decisions simplified not, what serves my image, but what reveals the I. You find yourself saying yes where fear once said no, and no where people pleasing once said yes, because the measure has shifted from reputation to radiance. Work becomes ministry, conversation becomes blessing, rest becomes obedience. Or the fruit begins to appear of itself as you remain yielded to the I that is knowing, moving, and being as you now from here. Abiding in silence is not withdrawal from life. It is entrance into the core of life, where doing arises from being. Silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence without opposite, the quiet in which the infinite invisible announces itself. When you rest there, you are not manufacturing outcomes or polishing persona, you are consenting to the vine's life to move through the branch. Fruit is not demanded, it ripens because the root is honored. The more you abide, the less you reach, and the less you reach, the more you notice provision, timing, and harmony appearing as though the world had been rearranged, when in truth only your center was reclaimed practically. Abiding in silence looks like many small surrenders throughout the day. Sit for a few minutes and let the machinery idle. Drop the compulsion to script prayer, to solve, to narrate. Let the breath unhurriedly find you. Place attention in the heart, or simply in the felt sense of being. If thoughts come, let them pass without debate. If emotions surge, let them move without commentary. You are not trying to produce a special state, you are consenting to simple awareness, unclenched and present. The instruction is as spare as a bell note: be still and know. Return to this holy interval often, upon waking between tasks, before meetings, after news, until continuity begins to form like a quiet stream beneath the day. Carry this silence into action. Wash dishes, answer emails, make plans, but do so as one listening under the noise. You will notice that words are fewer and kinder, that choices simplify, or that interruptions become guidance rather than irritation. Timing refines. You speak when the word is given, you refrain when it is not. Work becomes play in the best sense, absorbed, responsive, precise without strain, because the door is no longer a separate self managing outcomes, but awareness, allowing the next right step to reveal itself. Expect resistance from the restless mind. Boredom will masquerade as honesty and say, "This is nothing." Fear will warn, "If you stop driving, life will collapse." Let them speak and pass. Silence is not a trance. It is sober, awake, and effortless. It may feel empty at first because the appetite for drama is being weaned. Stay. A different nourishment is feeding you. Peace without a reason, clarity without argument, love without object. These do not scream their arrival, they disclose themselves like dawn, and with them comes a quiet confidence that does not need applause or proof. Abiding teaches you to honor pauses. You stop filling every gap with stimulation and let the gap do its work. Between inhale and exhale, a sanctuary opens. In conversation, a breath before response changes the outcome. At crossroads, a day of waiting saves months of repair. Sabbath becomes less a calendar square and more a rhythm of heart. Work flowing from rest, rest deepening work, until even busy hours carry the signature of silence. In time, you notice that demonstration has been replaced by disclosure. Healing appears as a natural correction, supply shows up as a right idea and right timing, relationships reknit without campaigns, creativity buds without pressure. You have ceased to agitate the branches and have tended the root, and life answers with its own ease because you are answering to the same ease within.